name's Ross MacKenzie, and I am thrilled to be celebrating Book Week Scotland with you by talking about my book, Evernight. First of all, I want to thank everyone at the First Minister's Reading Challenge Library Fund, awarded to the local library for helping make this happen today, along with everyone at On Fife Libraries, and I encourage you to go and check out the On Fife Library Facebook page, where there's lots of cool stuff happening. Celebrating Book Week Scotland, and just loads of cool stuff. So go and check that out. Thanks for watching today. Thanks for joining me. I'm so excited by this because it's been such a difficult year, and I'm sure for everyone. And I'm just so happy that things are starting to get moving again. In terms of, I've missed so much being able to get out and talk to you guys, get around schools and festivals and speak to you about my books. It's one of my favourite parts of being an author. And thank goodness we live in a time where we have this technology and we have the means to do this. And I just feel really privileged to be talking to you today, and really happy to be part of this Book Week Scotland celebration. So I'm going to talk about Evernight. Before I do that, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and a little bit about my writing and what made me want to be a writer and my favourite authors and things like that. So yeah, for me it started, I was always a storyteller. I loved, when I was a little boy, talking about 6-7 years old, I loved comic books. I still love comic books, but back then that was my introduction, I guess, to storytelling. Was comic books, and I used to draw comic books. I used to write picture books. In fact, my first picture book was about a crocodile named Crunchy Colin, and I actually wrote that at the end of the school year when we got all our work home with us. I had just started a new jotter. I think it was a spelling jotter, and it was empty. There was only a couple of pages used in it, so I had this entire jotter to fill. I just thought it was the best thing ever, all these blank pages. And I wrote a book about a crocodile called Crunchy Colin, who was constantly hungry, who could never be filled up, and who ate and ate and ate until one day he exploded, and that was Crunchy Colin. So I wrote that when I was about 7, but I never really realised that I wanted to be an author. I didn't know that was a thing really until I was in primary 5. So in primary 5, we had a teacher called Miss McLean, and Miss McLean was one of those teachers who she made going to school fun. Now, have any of you guys, no pressure if there are teachers present, but have any of you guys ever had a teacher who makes going to school fun? Miss McLean was that teacher. So, for instance, on a Monday morning when we would be traipsing in, the weekend's over, and we felt like zombies, and we'd traipse into the school and we'd plop down at our desk, and we'd all be in a bad mood because it was Monday morning, it was raining outside, and we were like, oh, I wish it was still Saturday. And Miss McLean would come in and she would tell us a story about her life, about her weekend, something that had happened to her when she was standing in line at the supermarket or when she was out walking her dog. And the way she told these stories, she made them come alive. And before we knew it, we'd be laughing and we'd be rolling about and we'd be wide awake and ready to start the week. And that was Miss McLean's magic. Her storytelling was just amazing, magical. And Miss McLean was also the first teacher we ever had who read aloud to us on a regular basis. Obviously, we had teachers before that who had read aloud to us, but Miss McLean read aloud to us on a regular basis throughout the school year. And like I said, when Miss McLean told a story, she made it come to life because she just did all the actions and she did the mannerisms, and her hands would be waving around and she'd do all the voices and all that sort of stuff. So Miss McLean read her stories, and the way it would happen would be every Wednesday and every Friday for the last half hour of school, Miss McLean would sit us down on the carpet around her desk and she would read to us from whichever book we happened to be reading at that time. And over the course of the year, we read quite a few books, and none of them, I enjoyed them, but none of them really made a huge impression on me. And then came the day that changed my life. You see, Miss McLean, one sunny Friday afternoon, gathered us around her desk. It was springtime, I'll never forget it. It was springtime, and it was sunny outside, and the sun was making those nice bars of sunlight come through the window, and the little motes of dust were suspended in the sunlight bars and shining like stars. And we sat down on the carpet as usual, and Miss MacLean, she said to us, "Okay, class, we finished the last book, now we're going to start a new book." And so Miss MacLean reached into her desk and she pulled out this book. Now, see if you can guess, by the couple of clues that I'm going to give you, what this book might be. So it was written by an author called Roald Dahl. Now, I'm going to guess, just a guess here, that the vast majority of you guys who are watching this video have read a book by Roald Dahl, at least one book, probably several books by Roald Dahl, because he's so good, okay? So anyway, this was a book by Roald Dahl. Now, the first clue is, there was a sinister-looking woman on the front cover with long black hair, and she was kind of jumping out the cover at me. Okay, that's clue number one. Clue number two is that this woman was wearing gloves. And clue number three, if you looked very closely at the illustration, you would notice, if you looked at this woman's mouth, that her spit was blue. What do you think that book might be? If anyone out there has guessed that this book is The Witches by Roald Dahl, then please take a bow. You are correct. Miss MacLean was reading us The Witches. And she opened the book and she began to read, and something really, truly magical happened. You see, on the first page of The Witches, there's a sentence or a paragraph which goes something along the lines of, "In fairy tales, witches wear pointed hats, and they have black cats, and they ride on broomsticks. But this is not a story about fairy tale witches. This is a story about real witches." And as soon as Miss MacLean read that line, it was as if someone had reached into my head and flicked a switch. Because for the first time ever, I had that feeling that only an amazing book can give you. Now, any of you guys out there who are readers and who have read a book that you love, you will know this feeling very well. Have you ever read a book and been enjoying it so much that you have felt like you are in those pages with those characters, and everything that's happening to them is happening to you, and everything that you see, everything, you taste it, you smell it, you feel it, you hear it, everything is there. You're part of that story. Those characters are real, those good guys, the bad guys, everything is real about it. That's how I felt when Miss MacLean read us The Witches for the first time. And when we finished the book, a few weeks later, and Miss MacLean closed the book and said the end, I remember vividly, I can still close my eyes and I'm back on that carpet in front of Miss MacLean's desk, and I remember thinking to myself, I want to make people feel the way that that book has just made me feel. I want to do that. I want to be a writer. And that is how The Witches changed my life. That's how a book can change your life. That's why books and stories are so important. From that moment on, my life took another turn. And I was lucky because I had parents who told me, you can do anything that you want to do, so long as you are willing to work hard for it. And that would be my message to you. There's nothing special about me. I'm just an ordinary working class guy from an ordinary working class family in Glasgow. I didn't know anyone in publishing. I didn't know any writers. I didn't know any editors. I didn't know anything like that. I just knew that I loved writing, that I wanted to be a writer. And so I worked hard at it. And I didn't take no for an answer. And I've managed to make my dream come true. So what I would say to you before I start talking properly about the book, about Evernight, is that if I can do that, if I can be an author, if I can be sitting here speaking to you about my book. There is absolutely no reason why you guys can't do whatever it is that you want to do with your life. One of my favourite parts about coming out to schools, something I miss so much, is when I ask you guys, what do you want to be when you grow up? And some of the answers that you give me are just unbelievable, inspirational. I've had people saying they want to be astronauts. I've had people saying they want to be physicists, movie stars, footballers. I've had people saying they want to be marine biologists, zookeepers, all of that amazing stuff. And you can do it. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter how you speak. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. None of that matters. All that matters is you are passionate about something, you love something, and you work hard to make that happen for yourself. And I promise you, if you do that, anything is possible. I'm proof of that. So, anyway, Evernight. Evernight is my newest book. Evernight is a book about dark magic. It's a book about witches. It's a book about forbidden spells. And when I started to write Evernight, the idea came from one place. You know, as an author, quite often I am asked, and I've spoken to lots of different authors over the years, and a question that we are asked all the time is, where do your ideas come from? A question that people ask me whenever I go to schools or festivals or wherever it is, the same question just bubbles its way back up to the surface again. Where do your ideas come from? So, it's a difficult question to answer. In fact, it's the sort of question that you kind of are frightened to be asked, because I don't really know the answer. Most of my books, almost all of my books, I don't know where the idea came from. I'm just glad that the idea did come. But for Evernight, Evernight's a rare thing because I know exactly where the idea for Evernight came from, and it came from my love of history. Now, some people think history is a boring thing, but history is the furthest thing from boring that you could possibly imagine. There are things that happened in our history that you would never believe. History can be stranger and more magical and more amazing than anything that we can make up. And my favourite period of history to learn about at the moment is Victorian, the Victorian era, when Queen Victoria was on the throne. And my favourite aspect of Victorian life is to learn about Victorian London, this huge sprawling metropolis filled with possibilities, filled with darkness, filled with dark corners, filled with slums and alleyways and sailors and you know, pickpockets and everything that we know about Victorian London. It's just such a magical place. And one of my favourite aspects of reading about Victorian London is reading about the jobs that the poor people did just to put food on the table, reading about the jobs that these people did just to survive. Some of these jobs were unthinkable today. Some of them were just unbelievable. We had, some of them are very famous. You had, let me think, you will have heard certainly of a chimney sweep. A chimney sweep. Lots of films feature chimney sweeps, Charles Dickens stories, things like that. You will have heard, I think, of a pickpocket. If you've seen Oliver Twist, you'll know what I'm talking about with a pickpocket. And there was more than that. That's just scratching the surface. There were people called pure collectors. Pure collectors is one of my favourites. This is disgusting, right? Pure collectors. So Victorians didn't have cars. They had no cars. They had horses. Thousands upon thousands of horses in the city of London during Victorian times. Now, what are thousands upon thousands of horses going to leave an awful lot of on the street? What are they going to produce an awful lot of? Can you guess? If you guessed horse manure, poo, then you are right. The streets of Victorian London were covered in horse manure, and there were people called pure collectors. And what they would do is they would walk around with a bucket in one hand and a spade in the other, and they would scoop up the poo from the streets into their bucket, and they would sell the horse manure. Now, who is going to buy a bucket of horse manure, I ask you? Well, they used it in agriculture, and they used it in the leather making process. So that's just one of the ways that people found to make money out of something you could never imagine. There were mudlarks. Now, as we all know, the river that runs through London is called the Thames. And the Thames is tidal. So when the tide went out, it left these huge mud banks. And mudlarks are people who would go onto these mud banks and they would search for things that had fallen off of ships or boats, tools or bits of metal or scrap or whatever they could find to make money from. And this was a dangerous job because quite often this mud would be almost like quicksand and people would be sucked down and you'd never see them again. So those were mudlarks. But my favourite, my absolute favourite job that I learned about when I was reading about Victorian London and the poor in Victorian London were toshers. Tosher. Toshers. This job involved the sewers. Now, Victorians built the sewer system under London, right, as we know it today. And they made it from bricks because they didn't do anything half-heartedly. They did things properly. So Victorians built these sewers, these beautiful, beautiful cathedrals of brick underground. Brick by brick by brick, all built by hand, right? And because the sewers under London are made of brick, and because there is water running through, it wears the brick and it wears the mortar away between those bricks, and it forms gaps into which things can fall, can become trapped. For instance, if you are a Victorian and you are walking along the street one day and your belly rumbles, oh, I'm hungry. Oh, that chestnut stall smells amazing. I'm going to buy myself a bag of chestnuts. Reach into your pocket, bring out a nice shiny coin. Oh, you've dropped the coin. Clink onto the street. Roll, 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 roll. Clink, clink, clink. Down the drain into the sewer stream where it can fall and become lodged in one of those gaps I was talking about. So there was treasure down in the sewers waiting to be discovered. And a tosher was a sewer treasure hunter. A tosher is someone who would go down into the sewers armed only with their gas lamps. And they would push back the darkness. And they would use their bare hands to search through the muck in the sewer stream and feel in between all those bricks and just wait for that moment where they found a piece of treasure, whether that was a coin or a ring or an earring or anything that they could sell. And as soon as I knew that that was a job, as soon as I knew that these brave souls went down under the city, took their lives in their own hands, risked their lives in these dark tunnels, I knew I had to write about it. But like I said, when I write a book, I think about what I would like to read first and foremost. When I start to write a book, I think, what would I like to read? And lots of the books I read have magic in them. So I knew that this book would have magic. And so I created the Silver Kingdom and I created the world of Evernight. So we have the Silver Kingdom and we have two camps of witches. We have the White Witches. Now the Silver Kingdom is mostly made up of people like you and I, people who can't use magic. You know, normal people. And these people, you know, they live under a king who is greedy, who is rich, and who wants nothing but to conquer all the lands around him. And he has done that because he has white witch slaves. Now, how it works is this. The king's assistant is called Mrs. Hester. She is the head of the White Witches. And any time a White Witch is born, Mrs. Hester takes that witch's soul and hides it away. And that leaves the witch with no dreams of being free. And so they are happy just to work for the kingdom, to work in huge brick factories producing spells which make the king's army stronger, which let him conquer more lands. So those are the White Witches. And on the other side of things, across the sea, in the great city of Westerly Witch, a city that is built into a tree the size of a mountain, we have the Westerly Witches. The Westerly Witches are wild and free, and their magic is colourful and full of imagination. They are the opposite of the White Witches. So you have these two camps, and the King and Mrs. Hester have spent generations telling all their people, all the normal people in the Silver Kingdom, the non-magical people, the vast majority, they've been telling them those Westerly Witches are the bad guys. They're dangerous. They are deadly. If you see one of those Westerly Witches, scream at the top of your lungs and a policeman will come. But that's not the truth. The hero of our story is a girl called Lara Bell Fox. And Lara is a sewer treasure hunter. She is a tosher. And one day, Lara is hunting in the sewers. And she finds something that is going to change her life forever. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to read you a little short excerpt from Evernight. And I am going to introduce you to Lara and Lara's job as a tosher. Lara Bell Fox was sheltering in the tunnels beneath the city when she heard a commotion. She almost didn't notice. Such was the great cacophony of rain and wind and rushing water barreling through the darkened sewers. Rivers of rain had fed the stream, leaving many of the tunnels inaccessible. Fierce water rumbled past her feet, splashing her wax-coated boots, gurgling and foaming, carrying twigs and leaves and drowned rats and cats. Lara's eyes were sharp and alert, and they flicked here and there and all about, watching the water as it passed through the golden light from the dragon breath lamp tied around her neck. Her muddled reflection stared back at her from the rough surface, 13 years old and brown-skinned and fiercely focused. She was hoping to glimpse shining things in the waters, coins or lost jewellery. But it was not a treasure that caught her attention now. It was the sound of an argument. Lara extinguished her lamp at once, and crushing darkness folded in on top of her. A newcomer to those tunnels would have been instantly lost, disoriented, panic-stricken, but not Lara. Lara breathed deep and stayed calm. She knew every twist and turn and dip of the sewers in the same easy, natural way a small child might know the rhythms of a nursery rhyme. Creeping forward, she followed the voices, the sound of her footsteps smothered by the stream. Around a bend she went, to an intersection where several sewers met. Light spilled from an adjacent tunnel, and Lara slowed, crouching low against the smooth, cold brick. She peeked around the corner, tingling with curiosity. There were 5 of them, 5 boys. Each was dressed in a tosher's things, a wax-coated jacket and boots and gloves with a dragon breath lamp hanging around his neck. 4 of the boys were large, almost men, but the fifth was younger and much, much smaller. The 4 larger boys had formed a circle around the smaller one. Lara knew him very well indeed, for she had taught him the ways of toshing herself. His name was Joe Littlefoot, and he was looking around at the others with fierce, frightened green eyes. "It's mine!" His hand hovered protectively on the toshing bag slung over his shoulder. "I found this stuff fair and square. I'm not even on your patch." "Well, we've decided to expand," said one of the older boys. His head was pale and shaved, his voice gravelly from all the pipes he smoked. Vin Cotton was his name, and Lara knew all about him and his gang and was wary of coming across them. "I reckon the tunnel running under Milk Street belongs to us now, which means the loot you find here is ours too." He pointed to the bag. "You can't just claim tunnels," cried Joe. "And who's going to stop us? You?" Lara bristled at this, felt her hackles rise. Cotton was a coward, a bully. "Last chance." Joe shook his head. "No, I need whatever I can get. My granny, she's ill. She needs looking after." Cotton held up a finger to quiet him. Then he brought a knife out from his coat and pushed the point of the blade against Joe's throat. Not enough to draw blood, but certainly enough to frighten Joe out of his wits. Lara almost cried out. "I don't give a hag's tongue about your granny." You need to learn a lesson in respect, sunshine. He nodded to the others. Take everything he's got. They closed in. Thinking quick, Lara reached into her own toshing bag and brought out a bent metal spoon she'd found in the tunnels earlier. She stood up, reared back, and threw the spoon as far down the sewer as she could manage. It hit the wall with a clang, and Cotton and his gang spun around and held up their lamps. Who's there? Run, Joe! Run! And I think we shall leave it there. So, if you think Lara is in trouble right now, just wait until you see what happens later on. You see, Lara is treasure hunting down in the sewers one day, and she finds a small, plain wooden box. And when she opens that box, expecting to find coins or treasure of some sort, what she finds instead is a small clockwork bird, a bird made of gold and wood and shavings of metal as fine as a moonbeam. And this bird, when Lara touches it, it comes to life. It springs to life and flutters around Lara's head and lands on her shoulder and pecks at her ear affectionately. And she loves this bird. She comes to think of it as her pet. She calls it Moonwing. But what Lara cannot know at this point, what she has no clue about, is that she has discovered in Moonwing an ancient, lost, magical treasure, a lost magical artefact, something with great power, and something that Mrs. Hester, the evil leader of the White Witches, will stop at nothing to get her hands on. And so Lara is pulled into this great adventure with new friends and old friends, with spells and enchantments and forbidden magic, with Westerly Witches and White Witches, with Mrs. Hester and Mrs. Hester's chief assassin, probably the most dangerous person in the book, Shadowjack, the man with no shadow. And Mrs. Hester has a plan, you see. Without spoiling the book, what I can tell you is that one day her plan goes too far. She unleashes an ancient weapon on the world, the Evernight. And it puts the sun out, it puts the stars out, and casts the world into frozen, endless darkness. And Lara realises that maybe, just maybe, it's her destiny to step up and save everything. And that is the story of Evernight. So I hope if you guys decide to check out the book that you enjoy reading it as much as I enjoyed writing it. And if you don't mind, just before I go, I have a little challenge for you. You see, one of my favourite parts of writing stories is when I write about the bad guys, when I make up the villains. Writing the bad guys is so much fun. It's amazing. And I get emails and I get tweets all the time saying that the bad guys in your books are brilliant, we love them. And that really makes my day. Because I think creating a good villain, an antagonist, is key to writing a good story. Because without a bad guy, without a villain, you can't have the good guys. You can't have, you can't have anything. You don't have a story. Without something for your heroes to come up against, you don't have a story. So the bad guys are really, really important. So my challenge to you, if you choose to accept it, is I want you to create your own villain, your own bad guy. But please remember this. In order to create a bad guy who is believable, in order to create a villain who is three-dimensional, you have to remember something. You have to remember that in the real world, people are very rarely all bad or all good. There are nasty people and they do terrible things. But when you are writing a villain, when you are writing the bad guy, to make them believable, the best bad guys believe that what they are doing, no matter how terrible it might be, that they are right, that their actions are justified. So I want you to go away and create if you will, a villain, and give this villain a backstory. Why have they ended up as the bad guy? What is it they want to achieve? And remember, in their head, they are right and everyone else is wrong. So there we go. There's the challenge. I hope you guys have fun doing that if you decide to take part. And please get in touch with me through Twitter and let me know if you have created your own bad guys. I would love to see some of them. My Twitter handle is @RossAuthor. That's @RossAuthor. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So I guess all that's left for me to do now, excuse me, is to say thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for giving up your time. It's been a real pleasure for me to speak to you today. It's just fantastic to be doing stuff like this again. And fingers crossed, by the time next year rolls around, we'll be out at schools again and I'll be able to see you guys in person. But until then, thank you so much. Have a great Christmas and a New Year. And hopefully I'll see you again soon. Cheers. Bye.